Okay, before we begin, we're still suffering some after effects of Hurricane Matthew, so some of you may or may not be having problems with Wi-Fi here, but we're working on it. Last session we were talking about aquaculture, and I said we'd return to it now, and I said we would give the feds a shot. In fact, the federal government, of course, has an extremely important role in aquaculture, whether it wants it or not, I guess, especially at the enforcement stage. And we're now going to hear some of the really interesting challenges that come up. These come up generally in terms of fisheries, but they come up especially in terms of aquaculture. The challenges of actually taking one of these cases into court, especially things like problems of proof. We're delighted to have with us today Heather McCready, who's Director General of Environmental Enforcement at Environment and Climate Change Canada, and who has been a past participant in these seminars. Many of you may remember her. And she's going to make a presentation together with Fernand Comeau, who is an enforcement officer with Environment Canada, who can, I think, really give a sense of some of the practical challenges in this area. So I'll turn it over to Heather and Fernand now.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me back. It must not have gone that poorly the first time, so I hope to do it justice today. Before I begin, there's a number of people we'd like to thank for the work that they did on this file. So the file we're going to present is an Environment and Climate Change Canada enforcement file. But we do our work with a number of partners, and we wouldn't be able to do it as well as we do without their support. So they deserve a shout out before we begin. So to the province of New Brunswick, particularly Kathy Brewer-Dalton, who taught me pretty much half of what I know about aquaculture, she had a big part to play in this case. And with the Environmental Protection Agency in the US, John Gauthier. As well in the US, the Maine Board of Pesticide Control had an enormous role to play, particularly at the beginning of this file. Back in Canada, the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, particularly Kathy Morris, were of great assistance to us, and as well, of course, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and all of their enforcement officers in Atlantic Canada. Customs and Revenue Agency helped us out a great deal with the search warrant and going through a lot of the electronic evidence that we seized, which is not a capacity we have internally ourselves because we're just not big enough. The RCMP also provided a great deal of assistance, as did Border Services. So this was a really big team that was around this file. So before we begin, I want to set some context for what we're going to try to do for you here today. There are a bunch of introductory slides, many of which I've done before actually in this forum back in February. So I'm not going to spend very much time on that. It's just there as a background for those of you who don't have the context about what we do, and I'm happy to answer some questions about those after the fact. I'd like to thank Fernand for being here. He's stepping in at the last minute for Robert Robichaud, who couldn't be here. Robert taught me the other half of what I know about aquaculture, so most of these slides are actually his, but Fern worked on this file. And what I really wanted to do, and what I think is much more interesting than listening to me talk, is to really put you in Fern's mind during this case. So Bill had confessions. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a lawyer, but I am a recovering lawyer. So I used to be a corporate lawyer in the US, so part of my 12-step program was to come and work for the federal government on environmental protection to rehabilitate myself and my soul. And the work that we do I find absolutely fascinating because before I bumped into Environment Canada enforcement at a job fair back in 2009, I had actually never thought about environmental enforcement. I never thought about how cases got to the courtroom, which is kind of embarrassing actually. Never came up in law school, not something we ever spoke about. So to all you law professors out there, you might want to spend a few minutes on this. What I find really interesting is, and what we want to show you today, is from the moment that a pollution incident happens to the time it takes to get to the courtroom, all the steps along the way. So how the officers go from something has happened, what could have caused this, to proving the elements of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt, which is very difficult. They can't just say, oh, we're pretty sure it was that industry that caused this problem. We have to actually be able to say beyond a reasonable doubt, it was that guy, not that person. And that is quite difficult to do in a marine environment. So this happens to be a case about an illegal use of pesticide in the aquaculture industry. The principles I'm hoping you'll take away from this could really apply to all of the complex investigations that we do, particularly under the Fisheries Act, and to a lot of our other cases. So I'm really hoping that you'll take away the difficulty of proving those elements of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt in a legal setting. The path the officer takes from the moment of the incident all the way to the end, and why it can take 2 years, and why often people will be asking us, why aren't you doing anything? It's been 6 months. Well, get comfortable. It's going to be another several months until we're done. And then the relationship between science and enforcement, particularly in a marine environment. We did some tremendous groundbreaking work with Environment Canada Labs on this case, and we would absolutely not have been able to do it without them. So our work is quite complicated and really relies on that scientific support. So without further ado, off we go, and we'll see. We've got some video clips, so let's hope they work. So very quickly, I'm going to give you a very short snapshot on Enforcement 101 at Environment and Climate Change Canada, and then we're going to turn it over to Fern, who's going to get into the much more interesting part of this presentation. A little bit on the evolution of environmental enforcement from 1976 until today, which coincidentally actually spans my lifetime. We used to be integrated into the rest of the department, but enforcement became its own spin-off branch about 10 years ago, and so we now have professional, dedicated law enforcement officers who are peace officers. They look very much like Fernand here in uniform and have various tools to perform their jobs. We have about 245 badged officers overall. Our enforcement branch is both wildlife enforcement and pollution enforcement. Fernand and I are on the pollution side. We are located all across the country. Canada's quite large, so with 245 officers for both wildlife and pollution, that's why we rely a lot on our provincial partners and also other parts of the federal government. We enforce lots and lots of laws and regulations. Today we're going to be talking about Section 36.3 of the Fisheries Act. You may be thinking, Fisheries Act, you're not DFO. No, we're not. But we handle the water pollution portion of the Fisheries Act, which is Section 36.3. I mentioned a bunch of partners earlier that worked with us on this file. You'll see many of them here. Principal activities that we carry out, we have an intelligence function, which is very much like what you'd see at the RCMP, so criminal intelligence, but applied in a regulatory setting, which was the subject of my presentation at the last symposium. We conduct inspections, which verify compliance with acts and regulations, and then we also do investigations to support or refute a suspected violation. Once something goes to court, we turn it over to the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, and they are the people who actually lay the charges and bring the file through court. We're governed by compliance and enforcement policies, which you can find online, and I highly recommend you actually look at them. The best section there for your reference is responses to alleged violations, which shows you, there we are, all the different things that we can do when we suspect a violation and all the tools we have. All right, so now we're going to get to the more interesting part of the case. So this is Section 36.3 of the Fisheries Act, which is my personal favorite law, or piece of law. Succinctly put, kind of glibly, it says, don't put bad stuff in water unless we tell you to by regulation. And I wanted to highlight some of the key things that we have to prove. So as I mentioned, we're responsible for administering and enforcing 36.3 of the Fisheries Act. A point I should make is that we do this now for every industry other than aquaculture. We used to also have the authority for aquaculture, which is why we're presenting on the Cook file, but there were some changes made a few years ago, so now DFO has that authority. So if the Cook file happened today, it would be DFO who would be giving this presentation and not us. But they currently don't have a prosecution on aquaculture, so that's why we're here today. So the key elements that I want you to really think about. So we have to prove that there has been a deposit, usually that part's somewhat easy, or the deposit has been permitted by someone. We have to prove that it's a deleterious substance. Now what that means is basically the substance is harmful to fish. Pretty much everything is harmful to fish, by the way. If you have to ask, it's probably harmful. So chlorinated water that we all have in our bottles is harmful to fish. Coffee is harmful to fish. There's lots and lots of things that are harmful to fish. We don't actually have to have an impact for us to prosecute or take action. Just by the virtue of the fact that the substance is harmful and deemed to be deleterious, we don't actually have to have fish die. Although quite often when we become involved, it's because there has been a fish kill. We also have to prove that it's water frequented by fish. Now, most water in Canada is frequented by fish. There don't actually have to be fish in the water. It just has to be water that fish can get to, where they may pass through or hang out from time to time. Why that's important is sometimes there actually aren't fish. So there are some water bodies, I particularly see them up north, that aren't connected to other water bodies that may or may not have had fish a long time ago, but they're so heavily polluted now that there's nothing living there anymore. So sometimes there will be subsequent water pollution, and we really do care about that, but we actually cannot act. We don't have the authority to act because it's not frequented by fish, so that's important. So these are all the things that Fernand has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in order to lay a charge. So I want you to remember that as we're going through. The key thing he's going to show you is what happens from the, I knew that was going to happen, from the moment of a pollution event happening and all the things that they do there, and into the inspection mode, and then on to investigation, and then to laying charges. All right, come on over.
Okay, thank you, Heather. So like Heather has mentioned, I'll be presenting what we call the Calico Salmon File, which originated back in November 19, 2009, when we received an incident report of lobster fishermen collecting or finding dead fish within their lobster traps. So here, if you take a look at the picture, we have, this is what's called Seal Cove Sound. You can actually see there's an aquaculture site on the right side of the picture, and there's one, it's hard to see, but there's one on the left side as well. And this incident actually occurred, it was towards the start of the fishing season, so where all the lobster fishermen, they all have their traps inland. So between these two sites, what we found, they were loaded with lobster traps. A dozen or so fishermen had all their lobster traps right in this area here. So we get the call on November 19, 2009 that...
And we can show with the video clip probably now. So this is our first video clip, wish us luck. This one I think starts with an ad, and I apologize for that, we weren't able to get rid of it. Everybody cross your fingers. This is looking promising.
Yeah, it's gonna work.
So you're about to see some CBC News coverage of the actual incident that started this case. With an ad for the Toyota 2016 Clear Out. And I'm not getting sound. Oh, because it's on mute. It is. That's good.
From 0%, or get up to $2,000 in cash incentives.
What a great deal.
With Tacoma for $99 weekly, or finance at 2.99%. The 2016 Toyota Clear Out event, only at your Atlantic Toyota dealer.
Can you guys hear fine?
The Fundy Coast is known much more for lobster fishing than it is for farming. That's why fishermen here are furious that an agricultural pesticide has somehow killed lobsters here. Today, New Brunswick fishermen's groups are speaking up about the problem, which they say has now affected 3 sites in a wide part of the coast. All of them are very concerned.
I just hate to see something come along, something new come along that we haven't seen before, and make our fishery go downhill, because without it, I don't think year-round can survive, or Grand Man, or Biscoya Bay Fundy without the lobster fishing.
There have been cases in the past where we suspected illegal chemical use, and this is the first time we've had proof.
Last November, fishermen in Grand Manan Seal Cove pulled up traps full of dead lobster. 5 days later, a fisherman 50 kilometers away in Pokalogan did too. Soon after, 1,800 pounds of weak or dead lobster discovered on Deer Island. Reed Brown helped make the grim discovery.
I've been around lobsters for all my life. I've never seen lobsters in that state.
Environment Canada has now launched 2 investigations into the lobster kills on Grand Manan and Deer Island. Tests confirmed that the lobsters were exposed to cypermethrin, a pesticide that's illegal to use in marine environments and toxic to lobsters. Officials say there's no evidence how the pesticide got into the bay, but there are few, if any, farms near the coast here. This fisheries officer says human health was never at risk, but any lobster kill is a concern.
It's unusual to haul up a trap and find everything dead in this type of thing. Again, these are isolated areas. It's 3 areas, it wasn't everywhere. But where we did see it, definitely the fish were affected.
Environment Canada can't say how long its investigation will take. Fishermen want answers soon before they haul up more traps with more damage inside. Chris Corday, CBC News, St. Stephen.
So this clip foreshadows the fact that we did eventually open an investigation and that we did start to suspect that it was coming from the aquaculture industry. But when this actually first happened, so you have a whole bunch of lobster that's come up dead or dying, which is actually something to bear in mind. For the lobster, if it was killed by some sort of substance, it would have had to be exposed to the substance and have had just enough life left in it to crawl into a lobster trap, or to have been dosed while it was in the lobster trap. For the lobsters to have been pulled up like that. Had they died before they made it to the lobster trap, they would never have been pulled out of the ocean, and we wouldn't have known that this had happened. It would have just been a very bad lobster year. So you're faced with a whole bunch of dead lobsters. What do you do first?
And to expand on that, we had a general idea of when it happened, because it was during the start of the season, and at that time, they hauled their traps every day. So obviously we knew that the day before everything was fine, and the day after everything was dead, so it happened between November 19th. And after the Seal Cove Grand Manan incident, we also had, like you guys seen in the video, a lobster fisherman was storing his lobsters in what's described as a lobster cart. It's where the fishermen store their lobsters after each day. They wait till the price goes up before selling them. And when it was time to sell his lobsters, he got to his lobster cart, he opened up the pen, and everything was dead in the pen. And in December as well, we had another fish kill incident towards Pokalogan, which we only got notified a couple days after, so we were too late for us to respond and gather evidence. So then the triage kicks in. What do we need to do? With the information we had dead lobsters, we had salmon farms, salmon pens in the area, finfish pens. But we still had some more information to collect.
So I'm going to pop in with a question. So what were some of the theories at this time about what might have caused this? So at this point, you suspected that it was a pesticide, but the pesticide you end up suspecting is actually not authorized for use in the marine environment. It is authorized for use in agriculture. So were there any other theories that people were proposing at the time for what could have done this?
See, at this time, we haven't received back our analysis from the lab, so we didn't know if it was a natural cause of death. It could have been a freshwater intrusion, could have been poachers, could have been, there's a lot of scenarios that could explain why the lobsters were dead, but we still had to wait and go through the process before making our assumptions. So again, as part of the triage, we needed to identify our partners, like Heather mentioned at the start. We had to work together with, because we've got some overlapping jurisdiction with, let's say, DFO, with the fishery, PMRA, which is a pest management regulatory agency. They're the ones who authorize and more or less sets the limits on which pesticides to use, when and how. The province of New Brunswick, we were working with the Department of Environment and the Department of Aquaculture, provincially in New Brunswick. For the response, we needed to look at all the information we had collected and act accordingly, which in our case, we needed to travel to every site and collect samples of what we thought would be relevant at the time. We collected what was fish samples, salmon samples from every pen in the areas, mussel samples on the cages, kelp, water, gasoline samples, anything we could find, we took samples of. Because again, at that point, we had no idea of what the cause was. So over this time, we conducted several inspections to gather legal samples from various sources. Because at that point, we still didn't know if it was, like Heather's mentioned, is it agricultural runoff? Is it linked to freshwater runoff? Is it marine activity? So we just had to go through the process of elimination. And part of that process is to talk to everybody involved. Local fishermen, employees, PMRA, DFO. Because at this point here, we were still new in this sector. We didn't know how the industry, what were the industry practice, like what is a salmon pen, how do they work, how do they feed, possible problems could they face, like predators, sea lice, let's say, and pinpoint all the possible sites in the area.
So when I was preparing for this presentation and took Robert's slides to combine them with mine, one of the points he made for me that bears repeating is this last bullet, review aquaculture industry practices. He's like, that one bullet took us months. Because as Fern mentioned, we hadn't been doing a lot in the aquaculture sector before, so we really didn't know how they work, what their challenges are, what their threats are, what the indicators might be of some sort of noncompliance, what sort of substances they're using, what the threats are to the environment. So as these guys started to suspect that this might be from the aquaculture pens, they really had to learn a ton about the industry. Fisheries Act 36.3 applies to basically everybody and everything that has any contact to water. So we end up having to learn a lot about a ton of different industries. And there are lots that we work with on a regular basis, like pulp and paper and mining and metal mining. But aquaculture at this point wasn't something you guys were really doing.
No. So here's a map of this. Oh, sorry. Here's a map of the southwest New Brunswick, where it's probably hard for you guys to see, but let's say just around the Grand Manan area, here is what we call Seal Cove. This is where the lobster kill was first reported. And if you look at all the green squares or green cages, these were all active finfish sites in the area. So you would have roughly 10 finfish sites in that area, and then you'd have another BMA, which is a bay management area. It's a different class here of fish. So just around Grand Manan itself, you had probably around 30 sites.
So I'm going to pop back in here for a second with what I found interesting about this map when I first saw it is, first of all, lots of aquaculture activity happening in this area. And if we suspect that it might have been a pesticide from a salmon farm that killed the lobster, we have to tie it back to a site, an individual site, beyond a reasonable doubt. And they're all very close to each other, and they may all be using the same thing or related substances. And this is the Bay of Fundy, so you're all from this area. There's a lot of tidal activity happening here, so things move around. So it's not like the water is staying static around the pens. So how do you then figure out and prove beyond a reasonable doubt if it did come from a pen? Which pen? How do you prove that? So how do you prove that? Takes 2 years is how you prove that.
And also, the second lobster kill would have been found in this area here, Fairhaven, and the third one was here towards Pokalogan. So we had it wasn't an isolated case. We had 3 different lobster kills in 3 different areas of the Bay of Fundy. And here's what we would describe as a normal operation, a normal finfish site, where you would have roughly 100-meter polar circle pens, and within every pen you could find up to 30,000 fish, 25 to 30,000 fish, and per site, per marine finfish site, we can see up to 30 pens. So 30 pens times 30,000 fish, and that would be just one green area here. So multiply that by all those sites. It's fairly well populated. And here's one of our enforcement officers trying to collect a fish at one of the pens.
So what he's doing here, I actually got to do this a few years ago. Sometimes they let me go out in the field and have some fun, so I'm not in meetings all day. I actually got to do that yesterday here in Nova Scotia. One of the first inspections I did was to go out and do aquaculture inspections. So here we have Charles Richard, who's standing on the side of an aquaculture pen, taking one of the Environment Canada boats up to the side. And what they do is they reach in and they grab a fish. Then you have to kill the fish so it doesn't just suffocate out of the water, which I'm not very good at. And then they take the sample of the fish to go back to the lab to see what's on that fish. And that's really the only way we can know what substances the industry is using. They do have to keep records, obviously, but if we're going to really look at what they're using, we look at the fish and we see what we can find on the fish.
So, sea lice. For those of you who haven't seen a sea lice, these are sea lice. It's a marine crustacean. It hooks onto the fish. Normally they they hook up towards the back of the fish, and then they migrate towards the head of the fish, where the blood vessels are closer to the surface
The surface of the skin.
Yeah, surface of the skin. So they actually eat up eat the flesh, which creates an issue for disease for the fish and may actually end up killing the fish, which is what we were finding around this time. We had a very severe sea lice infestation. And what the industry was normally using, they were normally using this in-feed product, but at this time the sea lice were getting immune to this in-feed product. So the industry had to come up with other means of treating their fish. If not, they would end up killing all their stock.
And these are all things that they had to learn from scratch after this incident happened, because as I mentioned, we hadn't been doing lots and lots of work in aquaculture before. And I still learn new things every day from officers. Like last evening when we were going over the presentation, Fern mentioned, and this is worth repeating, sea lice are from the same family of crustaceans as lobster. So if a substance is going to kill sea lice, it's going to have an impact on lobster, which is a really important fact for me on this anyway.
So what can you do to treat for sea lice? Well, the industry had two methods. They had the skirt tarp treatment method, which is where they would bring in a barge with a large tarp on it, and they would tarp, surround the cage, bring it up to approximately 5 meters of water. So you got roughly 5 meters of water in this pen. Then you would mix the pesticides. At this time here, they were permitted to use a Salmosan product. Add the pesticide in the pen and aerate for roughly an hour or so. And once the treatment was done, all they do is they just remove the tarp, and the plume just exits the pen with the outgoing or ingoing current. And they also have access to well boats, a well boat treatment. What they would do in this case is they would bring the well boat next to the pens. They got two wells, 300 cubic meters of water per pen, per hole. They would pump the fish in the boat and then aerate the fish in the boat, and then flush the pens with clean water before pumping the fish back in the pen. But in this case here, the hydrogen peroxide isn't used to kill the actual sea lice. It just stuns them, it knocks them off the fish, and then they're just released back. And this is what happens when you don't treat your fish for sea lice. It'll end up killing your stock. In this case here, this was back in 2010, where we were finding up to 300 to 400 sea lice per fish, and normally you would expect to see around 5. So it was, this here is actually a dive. This is a week worth of fish. So roughly 1,000 fish was killed in a pen in a week. Sharing the water, do you want to?
Sure. So this is one of my favorite pictures from this file. I just want to explain what you're seeing here. So you're seeing a lobster fisherman who's about to release his trap into the water, and you can see how close the aquaculture pens are to the lobster fishery. And that's one of the issues here, and why there's so much tension between these two industries is they really are actually sharing the water together. They're neighbors. The lobsters, the salmon, when they're in the pen, release a lot of things down into the ocean, and they're things that lobsters like to eat. So lobsters will often be found right underneath an aquaculture pen, and so that's why they're putting the traps down there. And that's why it's anything that goes into that aquaculture pen is going to have an impact on the lobsters nearby. And that's something that I find quite interesting about this. And we've got some stats, I think, coming up on the industry, and Aaron actually gave us a fantastic introduction, so thanks for that. On both of these industries, the lobster fishery and the aquaculture industry, are both very important economically in this part of the country. And it makes it quite difficult when one is having potentially a negative impact on the other. And it really, the tensions really came to a head for us, and we were at ground zero on this, being the major government body that was investigating the incident. So there was a lot of pressure on us to do something about it. So pressure to respond, what was happening for you?
So like you mentioned, pressure to respond, we were getting lots of tensions. We found there was lots of tensions between the lobster fishermen and the aquaculture industry, because like you saw in the picture before, that was actually taken on the day we responded to the November 2009 lobster kill incident, where he was actually fishing within the lease. He was inside the lease aquaculture lease. So we have two industries. We have the aquaculture sector and the lobster fisheries, which are butting heads. And as you can see in the numbers here, they're fairly similar, fairly close. One is worth roughly, or was worth roughly 192 million in 2008, while the NB lobster industry was worth roughly 115 million. And both industries in these small rural areas, they do employ a large number of folks in the area. And we're also getting pressures by the NGOs and the Traditional Fisheries Association demanding that we ban use of all chemicals. And like we mentioned earlier, also if you leave these fish untreated, it will kill the fish within 4 weeks.
So this is an important point, so I can jump in here again. One of the things we're looking for when we're investigating something is who is motivated to break the law, and why are they motivated to break the law. Then you're more likely to see who actually did it. So follow the money, as they say in the movies. And it's difficult to really underscore or downplay the impact this was having on the aquaculture industry. They were really facing a serious problem here, and I don't want to minimize that. Sea lice were running rampant in the Bay of Fundy at the time, and it was killing off all of their fish stock. They were losing, I don't know how much money, but tens of thousands of dollars on a regular basis. So it was a real threat to the industry itself. And so it's something that we understand, and again, I don't want to downplay that. But for us, we actually take that as an indicator that there may be some noncompliance, because that's where you see people motivated to do the wrong thing when they're in a crisis. So when we're looking at all the various factors and what could possibly cause this, that's one of those things that makes us pay a little bit more close attention to that particular actor.
And we were also made aware that their normal modes to treat the sea lice, which was with the in-feed, wasn't working at that time, so they needed to find other means to get rid of the sea lice or risk losing their stock. So February 2010, we decided to get together with our partners, and we created a inspection protocol or inspection regime where we would go in and inspect the. Actually, that's in the slide.
Well, here's where we know it's cypermethrin. So
Okay, yeah.
lots of words on the slide. I don't want us to go over every single word here because you can read it online. But at this point, our lab had confirmed the presence of cypermethrin on both the lobster and the salmon samples. So now we have something that we know is quite harmful to fish. It's a pesticide, which is by its nature is designed to kill. It's not authorized for use in the marine environment, so something's going wrong here. It shouldn't be on the lobster and it shouldn't be on the salmon. But again, I want to take you back to the elements of the offense. Just because we find cypermethrin on the lobster and on the salmon doesn't mean it was the aquaculture industry that put it there. Maybe they are also victims of somebody else's misuse of a pesticide. So we have to really figure out why it was there and who did what. So this ends with us saying that we opened 2 investigations because we had grounds to believe that there was a violation. What's more interesting is what's coming up next. So here's what we already knew about cypermethrin. Watch the plume.
So this is actually a dye study test that was done by EC and DFO in the 1999, just to show what happens after or once the actual tarp is removed from the pen. So as you can see, this was 25 minutes post-release, and it doesn't. Some people think that it just dilutes and goes away, but it actually stays intact as a plume. It will follow the water column and still stay somewhat intact. So whatever you find within this plume is most likely going to be affected or probably killed. So this is 25 minutes post-release, and if you look at 45 minutes post-release, you still have a significant size plume. And if you look at the color, see how red it is? The more dilute, the less red it's going to get. But even 45 minutes, it's still almost the same color as it was as it's left the pen. So what we were seeing is it just flows as a distinct, it's still intact. And we followed this plume for an hour and a half, roughly. So you see it's getting less red, but it's all going towards the inside of a small bay area. So even 2.5 hours after, the plume has reached inside this cove bay. So pretty much everything that would have been here would have been affected by what was released in the pen.
Couple key points from that I took away. The expression dilution is the solution probably doesn't apply for this substance because it is staying quite close together. It's staying quite at a high concentration. The second thing is you see how much it moves. So even if we had an aquaculture site here and lobsters dying here, it doesn't necessarily mean that the substance came from that aquaculture site. It might have come from somewhere else and washed over both of them together. So that makes it even more complicated for these guys to prove what they need to prove to make this case work. So really interesting study that we fortunately had done many years before this case happened, which gave us a bit of a running start on how this substance worked and what we needed to do to prove what we needed to prove.
So now going back to the spring 2010 till the summer of 2012, we got together with our partners and we decided to conduct routine inspections on a routinely basis. So every 6 to 8 weeks, we went in the Bay of Fundy and we collected a fish or inspected every single marine finfish site in the area. And due to these samples or inspections we collected, we were able to prove, or we added we opened an additional 17 investigations were open due to the fact that we were finding cypermethrin in the fish. So now we got time to, this is where kind of like the CSI kicks in. It's when we found fish with cypermethrin in the fish or on the fish. Now we need to know what it means. Where is it coming from? How do we pinpoint it back to a certain site? So what we did, enforcement, SNT, which is Environment Canada Science and Technology, and DFO, we conducted some lab studies. We had a general idea of what concentrations they were being used at, because we don't want to use too much. If you use too much, you're going to kill the fish. So that's what we started at as a general concentration. So what we did is we exposed the fish to what we suspected was a thyme that was being used for a treatment. Then we took those fish and then we put them in clean water. And then we sampled those fish every week for a period of 4 weeks. And what we found is we were finding cypermethrin within the gills up to at least a month. So this would mean that if we find a pesticide residue in a fish, it would mean that this fish could have been exposed up to a month prior. But that still didn't help us to find the actual source. Where is it coming from? So what we did, along with DFO, we had some hydrologists help from SABS, the St. Andrews Biological Station, which they had done a significant amount of work on dispersion studies, plumes, how does a substance flow in the waters of the Bay of Fundy. So we were able to come with some sort of model to prove that, let's say, within a kilometer, you tend to see at least 1,000-fold dilution. So let's say you drop something at point A, by the time it reaches point B, it's going to be diluted by 1,000 folds. So we knew what they were treating, or had a general idea of what they were treating their fish at from the start. So what we did, we took that concentration and divided that by 1,000 folds to kind of mimic what was actually happening at a kilometer away. And then we estimated that from our past studies, we knew that a plume could pass through a site for roughly 4 hours. So we used those concentrations, exposed the fish to 4 hours at the 1,000-fold dilution of what the treatment would be. And what we found is that we couldn't find it in the fish. So that helped us to prove or show that if we find low amounts of cypermethrin within the fish, the source had to be at least a kilometer, or the pesticide could not have been used within a kilometer. So let's say there's 5 kilometers between a site, and we got a high hit, a high concentration of cypermethrin, it had to come from that site. So that was key for us to prove or eliminate the doubt of cross-contamination between sites.
So Fern actually won an award for this, and I'll tell you about it because he probably wouldn't. So some of our officers and some of our lab staff actually won a citation of excellence from our deputy minister for their teamwork on this. Any of you who worked in government know that we love our silos, and we don't like to work together sometimes because we're so busy on our various specific mandates. But these guys came together and did some really groundbreaking work, and we wouldn't have been able to advance this file without that. I think you guys were referring to yourselves as CSI Atlantic, which I think would make a great spin-off show. So anyway, they won an award for this, and these awards are quite competitive. So congratulations to you all for that.
Thank you. So again, to come back to why it takes up to 2 years for an investigation, just this part here took us almost 6 months, which was a key part of the case for us to rule out this cross-contamination. And of course, we also found some sites, we had some hits, but where the sites were too close to each other, there was no way for us, they were within a kilometer, so there was no way for us to actually rule out the cross-contamination, so we ended up having to drop those charges or counts. And while this was going on, at this point here, we had enough evidence or reasonable grounds to believe an offense was committed. By who? So we drafted an ITO, which is information to obtain a search warrant. So we had dead lobsters with pesticides on them. We had fish with pesticides on them. We had possible source of where it was used and by who. So at that point, we had enough grounds for a search warrant. So we drafted a search warrant, and we ended up searching 8 search warrants, 8 locations at the same time. Would have been Kelly Cove Salmon's offices from St. John to Blacks Harbor to pretty much all their offices in Deer Island, Campobello in southwest New Brunswick. And what we ended up doing is we ended up these days, most of the evidence we see or tend to see, it's all electronic based. So we ended up having a CRA come with us, their computer search evidence recovery specialist. So what they did is they came in on site with us, and they ended up mirror imaging Cook or Kelly Cove Salmon's servers. Instead of seizing the whole thing, we actually just mirror image their data off their server, and then we come back home with it. But we also collected numerous bankers' boxes of physical papers. We collected samples of every container drugs we could find on site, because at that point we believed or suspected that they were bringing this pesticides on site in jerry gas cans. So every jerry gas cans, Farsol cans, any cans we could see, we ended up seizing them and analyzing them as well for residues. CRA ended up seizing 6 million e-files from Kelly Cove's servers, 30,000 of them which were transferred to us, Environment Canada.
How long does it take to read 30,000 files?
A long time. So what happens here is CRA have some sort of big database or computer system where they end up downloading all their information on there. And then from that, we provide them with keywords. They do keyword searches and then provide reports back to us. So yeah, this is another explanation of why it took 2 years for us to move ahead.
So now I think we have video clip number 2. Cross your fingers for us. This one should play without an ad.
The first dramatic details of a raid in Charlotte County are surfacing. Dozens of officers from Environment Canada, armed with guns and wearing flak jackets, seized documents from the offices
He doesn't have a gun.
of Aquaculture in southern New Brunswick. They're looking for any evidence related to the use of a banned chemical suspected of killing hundreds of lobsters in the Bay of Fundy last fall. Our Rachel Cave has been digging into the developments on this story, and she joins me now with all of this. So Rachel, how did this all come about?
Well, about a year ago, Harry, hundreds of dying or dead lobsters were being hauled up in traps off Grand Manan and Deer Island, and the fishermen who brought them up said they'd never seen anything like this before. The lobsters were tested. It was found they had been exposed to cypermethrin, which is also toxic to sea lice. That prompted accusations against the fish farming industry that they were using this pesticide illegally. The industry has consistently denied those allegations.
So a toxic chemical on the loose somewhere, and raids yesterday. What actually happened with those raids?
Well, no less than 29 officers descended upon 8 offices owned by Cook Aquaculture, including the corporate head office in St. John. Here is Cook Aquaculture spokesperson Nell Hulse.
You know, as they do in these kinds of investigations, they come unannounced and ask people to step away from their files and their computers, and they basically go through everything with fine-tooth comb. They go through all of our electronic files, taking computer files, and in some cases it was a matter of hours they were finished. In some cases they spent a lot longer. So it was very disruptive to us yesterday, and you know, it's not a pleasant experience for our employees.
Now, we're told that some of the seized material was actually gathered into a trailer outside Cook's St. George office. Some photos were taken and submitted to the Fundy North Fishermen's Association. And we had a chance to ask one of the enforcement officers why it had to appear so dramatic.
Essentially, when we execute a search warrant, we try to do it as efficiently and rapidly as possible. We try to do that in a way that it's less disruptive to the companies. And obviously in this case we had 8 locations, therefore the numbers were used to scatter the officers so that we could achieve those goals to make sure that things happen efficiently and rapidly.
So when is Environment Canada, Rachel, going to have some answers on this?
Well, they say these kinds of investigations are scientific and complex, and there's no telling. Meanwhile, the industry says it's gone on long enough that the longer they go without providing any feedback or answers, the more they foster mistrust against fish farming in Charlotte County, Harry.
All right, Rachel, thanks very much for that. Rachel Cave.
One moment. It worked. Here we go. Carry on.
So now, while this was all going on, we also had our intelligence folks trying to gather or look into possible sources of where this company could be purchasing these pesticides, because they were legal to use on land, but not in the ocean. So our intelligence folks, through their contacts, were able to find the possible source in the States, in the Maine, because of course St. Andrews and well, it's St. Stephen, Calais, Maine, it's somewhat close. So what we found is we had a small feed dealer up in Calais, Maine, which we found kind of odd, was selling large amounts of this cypermethrin-based pesticide. So what we because we don't have any inspection powers up in the down in the States, we ended up contacting our counterparts, the US EPA, so that they could go in at the store and conduct an inspection for us. So US EPA goes at this feed store in Calais, conducts their inspection, and comes back to us and tells us, well, these guys have been selling large amounts of this cypermethrin-based pesticide, but the owner couldn't confirm to who he was selling them to, and he told the US EPA officers in the States that because this guy lived in Canada, he told, well, all his documents are in Canada. So then the US EPA gave us that information, which was enough for us to apply for an inspection warrant at his house, which is similar to a search warrant, but it's for inspection purposes. So we ended up inspecting his house, and we couldn't find any reports or any sales receipt linking the pesticide sales in the States to Canada. But at that point here, the vendor was feeling the pressure, and a couple of weeks after, he agreed to give us a statement and confirmed that he was only selling his pesticides to one customer, and that was Calico Salmon. So at this point here, we had Calico Salmon in the possession of large amounts of this cypermethrin-based pesticide. And all this is going on, we're still collecting evidence, and analyzing the evidence, the 30,000 files that were seized, the statements that were taken, the evidence. All this needs to be compiled into a court brief. So obviously we were dealing with PPSC, which is our Crown prosecutor, from time to time. So he was aware from the start what we were doing and how we were doing and where we were going with this. So he had a good idea of how we were approaching this file. And on November 2011, we had enough evidence to lay a charge. Charges were laid against the senior managers for their knowledge of what was going on. They were aware at all times that it was illegal to do it, and the company. So we laid the charge on Calico Salmon and three high officials.
And here we go to our final video clip. Let's see if we can bat 1,000 on this.
tonight in Charlotte County, where the province's largest aquaculture company faces charges in connection with the death of hundreds of lobsters in the Bay of Fundy. The kill happened 2 years ago, and yesterday the Federal Environment Department laid charges against Kelly Cove Salmon, a division of Cook Aquaculture. The CBC's Bobby Jane McKinnon picks up the story.
Kelly Cove Salmon, the farming division of Cook Aquaculture, was charged by Environment Canada on Tuesday. The company is facing 11 counts of depositing a substance that's harmful to fish into fish-bearing water. Cook's CEO, Glenn Cook, who owns the company with his father and brother, was also charged, along with 2 other senior company officials.
Is related to the illegal usage of a pesticide, a cypermethrin-based pesticide, that Environment Canada found in samples following the inspections done after the dead and dying lobsters in Deer Island and Grand Manan, New Brunswick.
The charges stem from 2 investigations in December 2009 and February 2010, when hundreds of dead and dying lobsters were hauled up in traps. Tests found the lobsters had been exposed to cypermethrin, an agricultural pesticide that's illegal for marine use in Canada and toxic to lobsters. At the time, officials said there are few, if any, farms near the Fundy coast that could have been the source. Cypermethrin, a fast-acting insecticide, has been used to kill sea lice in European fish farms. Officers from Environment Canada raided the company's offices last November. Company spokeswoman Nell Hall says the lengthy investigation has been difficult.
To have this sort of black cloud hanging over everyone's head has just been very, very difficult. So in that sense, we look forward to being able to address the charges specifically once we see what they are.
Meanwhile, environmentalists are happy to finally see some action on the file.
We're glad that action's being taken, and we hope that Environment Canada is able to get to the bottom of what's occurring with illegal pesticides in the Bay of Fundy here.
The matter is scheduled to go to provincial court in St. Stephen on December 13th. If convicted, the maximum penalty is up to $1 million per charge and/or up to 3 years in prison. Bobby G. McKinnon, CBC News, St. John.
The body of
There we go.
So, outcome. On April 26, 2013, Kelly Cove Salmon ended up pleading guilty to 2 counts of violating the Fisheries Act, Section 36(3), and agreed to the following facts. They agreed that they had acquired 72 cases, 8 pints per case, of a cypermethrin-based pesticide from a specialized dealer in 2009. They were also aware that at all relevant times that this pesticide was banned for marine use and was not registered and was banned for marine use. And they also agreed that it was used for 19 illegal deposits at 15 different aquaculture sites within the Bay of Fundy. They were also ordered to pay a fine of $500,000, which at the time was the second largest Fisheries Act fine in Canada, I believe. $100,000 was to be paid to the courts, $50,000 to be paid to the EDF, which is the Environmental Damage Funds, and $350,000 to be administered by the UNB for scholarships and grants for research projects. And in addition to this, the pesticide vendor, the Clyde Eldridge, he also pled guilty to a count in Maine for providing false statements to the EPA investigators. Like I mentioned earlier, during the initial inspection, he had lied to the inspectors. He told them that he wasn't aware of where he was being selling these pesticides, yet he was aware. So in 2015, he actually was sentenced to pay a fine of $5,000 and 1 year's probation.
So that's it. So thanks for your time. And just to recap on some of the main takeaways we wanted you to have. First of all, it's that we need to prove the elements of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt. We need to tie it back to a particular point source. And that is something that is challenging, but it is how the law works. I don't think you want us to have the power to say, I think it's one of you guys. so we're going to make you all pay. That's not the way that a criminal law-based system works, and nor should it. In a marine environment, it's really difficult to prove these elements beyond a reasonable doubt, particularly in the Bay of Fundy. Things move around so much. So you saw all the work that Fernand and his colleagues had to do in order to make that work. And the third point I wanted to bring home was the importance of science and lab support that we needed for this. We could not have done this without the scientists at Environment Canada and without their cooperation. So we're very fortunate to have had at that time some really fantastic scientists working in the department. And that's one of the things that makes environmental law enforcement actually much more complicated than traditional criminal law enforcement. And that's why some of our cases can take a really, really long time because all of these things have to be worked through from beginning to end. So from the moment that the fish kills happened back in 2009, the actual guilty plea ended up being in 2013. So quite a lengthy process. And this is quite representative of a lot of our more complex investigations, particularly under the Fisheries Act. So you'll see this as well in mining and pulp and paper and things like that, and also some of the work that we do under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. Thank you again for your time. Thank you very much to Fern for stepping in at the last minute and making this much more interesting than it would have been if I had done it by myself.
Thank you so much. I should say just personally that's interesting for me because I grew up in Charlotte County and still spend the summers there. If I can just start with a question, because what struck me most about that was at the very end when the American was the one who actually was held personally accountable, could have gone to jail, was probation, but we didn't hear anything about the personal responsibility of the people who obviously did this. One would think there's nothing that attracts attention like being sent to jail. Was that an issue that people talked about in the?
Sure. So you don't often see so far individual company officials in Canada being prosecuted. We tend to see the corporation be prosecuted. What you'll often see is, or sometimes you'll see individuals being charged, and then it becomes part of the plea bargain that we agree to drop the charges against those individuals and focus it on the company. It's not unprecedented. We did sentence a dry cleaner in Alberta to jail time. So it has happened. So it's not off the table, but it is rare. And it's something that I'm actually personally looking more into about the effectiveness of that. And what we're trying to do with the prosecution is really have not just a specific deterrence on that company, but a general deterrence on the entire industry. And it's, there are theories that that's much more effective when you can tie it to individuals. So something to look forward to in the future, potentially.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, is it fair to say that had this happened in the United States, they might have taken a somewhat more aggressive approach towards the individual as opposed to the?
Honestly, maybe yes, maybe no. For one thing, to tie it to an individual, you really have to, they have to have had knowledge, they have to have had care and control, you really have to work through their process. It's really handy sometimes when you can recover emails, and we do see this, where somebody says, yes, we should comply with this law, but gosh, it sounds like it's a lot of work. So I am going to decide not to comply with this law, and I'm going to direct you thusly. We do find that once in a while, but we do have to, again, prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. Really difficult to compare the Canadian legal system to the American on environmental things because it's very different. So the EPA has a civil enforcement angle and a criminal enforcement angle, and they actually do so much of their work on the civil side. And that's why they end up recovering massive fines, because their burden of proof is only to balance a probability. So for the lawyers in the room, or recovering lawyers, there is a great big difference between beyond a reasonable doubt and then the civil standard. For those of you who followed pop culture back in the 90s, it's the OJ difference. So OJ was found not criminally responsible beyond a reasonable doubt, or not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but lost the civil suit because it was a different standard of proof. So it's a little bit difficult to compare the two. But in this case, this person in particular lied to EPA investigators, and that's what they were able to get him on. It wasn't the sale of the pesticide, it was the lying.
We have a question from Alberta now on the web. How was there still pesticide residue found on the search at the site so much later after the deposit? Was it because they kept doing it after 2009? And what if they stopped using it after 2009? Would there have been enough evidence without it actually being there?
Well, what we found is that from our exposure studies that it does stick to the fish up to 30 days. So the fish would have to be exposed within 30 days. It wouldn't stay longer. I don't know if that's...
There's a couple here, okay.
Thank you. You said that there was a long inspection process and then you went for the search warrants and it sort of switched over into an investigation at that point. Can you describe what the relationship was like with all of the people who were involved in, I'll call it the targets of the inspection/investigation? How cooperative were they? What was the relationship like? And then what happened when it turned into an investigation and you were focused on Kelly Cove?
What we found is during inspection, they were cooperative with it because they are required to help us. They're required to give us documents. They're required to assist us during our sampling. But once we hit the investigation stage, they didn't want to cooperate anymore with the investigation.
So I'm actually going to use that to make a point that a lot of people don't understand. I think you do, so bonus points to you. You mentioned switching from inspection to investigation mode. It's a really key point. So we have inspection powers under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and also under the Fisheries Act that are vast. Fern can basically go anywhere, look, where are you going? He can hide. He can go anywhere, look at anything, take anything he needs, as long as the location he's going to may contain a substance that we can regulate or may have some activity that we regulate. These powers are far greater than what the police have. So there's so much that we can do in inspection mode. And often when an incident happens, people will say, are you investigating? And we say, no, we're inspecting. And they say, why aren't you taking this seriously? We say, well, we are. And there's so much we can do with inspection powers. But once we have reasonable grounds to believe that an offense may have been committed, then we have to switch to investigation mode. And that's where charter considerations start to come to play and where we have to issue caution statements when we're questioning people and we have to get search warrants when we want to seize any kind of evidence or information. And that's why it's not uncommon that a company will at that point start to become less cooperative and start to involve their lawyers because it's getting a lot more serious. And anything that they say or give to us may be used against them in court, and they understand that very well.
Sorry, I think we're here first.
I just want to follow up on that issue about the distinction between inspection powers and investigation mode. Is there, I guess when you're still in the inspection mode, or under your powers, your inspection powers, is there the agriculture industry is a global industry. It's not just in Canada. Is there a repository of data or knowledge anywhere, or is there a guide to best practices for the industry that you can look to in order to guide your investigation and or your inspection in order to focus on certain key issues for enforcement purposes later on?
I don't think that's something that they found in the course of their work. And I think it's done very differently in different parts of the world, and there are also different legal requirements in different parts of the world. So as Fernand mentioned, cypermethrin, I think was at the time, may still be legal for use in the marine environment in Maine. So one of the theories in the beginning, especially because this stuff travels, was it couldn't have been a Canadian company, it must have been an American aquaculture company, and it traveled up. It's also legal for use in Scotland, I believe. But pretty controlled concentrations. So there are always industry best practices and guidelines that we can look to. The thing is, though, that just complying with those doesn't mean that they're complying with the law. They can become important later on when we start to assess a due diligence defense, which we didn't really get into here, which is a really important piece when you're looking at environmental law investigations. These are all strict liability offenses, so we don't have to prove mens rea. We don't have to prove their intent, but we just have to prove they did it. But their most powerful defense is a due diligence defense where they say, we took all reasonable measures, et cetera, et cetera. So that's when industry practices and those standards can come into play as something that we assess. But whether or not there are best practices, you still can't actually use these substances if they're not legal to use.
Thanks to you both for a great presentation. I have a question primarily about quantum and about deterrence. So I'm well aware that this sort of plea agreement resulted in the payment of what would be an unusually high fine by environmental enforcement standards and possibly set a record. That said, I mean, it still pales in comparison to, I mean, you threw out some stats at the start of your presentation about, you know, $100 million plus industry. We're still talking about a fine of less than $1 million. In your experience, you know, are fines, you could use this case particularly or speak more generally if you'd like, but are fines in the magnitude that they're being handed out, are they an effective deterrent, or do we need sharper teeth?
So, thanks for that question. So the Government of Canada enacted something called the Environmental Enforcement Act. I think it came into force back in 2010 or 2009. The fine scheme for that initially applied to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and then later raised the fine, the mandatory minimum for the Fisheries Act as well. But these offenses took place before those fines were in effect. So it's under the old fine scheme. So we've seen some more recent cases that have come back with far steeper fines. The biggest one we have so far under the Fisheries Act, and the record to beat if you're competitive, is $7.5 million for the Lac Bloom file. We've also seen, and one of my other really favorite case, other than this one, is Teck Metals file out in British Columbia, where they were ordered to pay $3 million, but more importantly, the company committed to making $50 million of improvements at their plant, which would stop so much pollution in that area. So that's the kind of thing that I find really rewarding. It's not so much punishing people with a massive fine, although I do appreciate the deterrence effect of that, but it's the fact that the company will be making such extraordinary improvements. So we are seeing fines go up, but we are, and I spoke a little bit about this the last time I attended the symposium in February, anecdotally, and I don't have data on this yet because it's too early, most of our cases previously used to plead out. The Cook file is a good example of that. So the company pleads guilty. And the theory about that is that the fines can be considered the cost of doing business. It's easier just to pay the fine and lift the shadow from your company and admit to some things and move on. With the mandatory minimums, the idea of the mandatory minimums was to make environmental offenses not the cost of doing business, so that it would actually hurt the company and it would make them think twice about doing that. There's lots of things we can do now that we are just starting to figure out, such as calculating the use and non-use value of the damage caused by the company, which could ratchet up these offenses into the tens of millions or more, and that could be quite significant. So because of that, it's starting to become worth the while of corporations to actually fight these things in court, particularly if they don't think that they were guilty. So we're seeing more things go to court. What happens when you go to court is sometimes you lose. And that creates precedent, and the precedent then can have a chilling effect on the rest of the work that we're doing and how things are interpreted. So mandatory minimums can be very, very positive, and I think they will be, and I hope they will be. I think they're driving up fines across the board. But we have to really watch what's going to court and what the precedents are that are being set. So it's something that we're paying very, very close attention to see how the courts are interpreting these things and how many cases are being won and lost and why. And every time we lose, and I said this last time and I really mean it, every time we lose, we're going to come back and do it better next time. So we're going to look at that case and figure out what went wrong. And if the facts simply weren't there, the facts weren't there. But if there was something we could have done better to prove those elements that we didn't do, we're going to make sure that we learn from that and use it in the next file.
I think actually, Heather, is something you addressed last time. I think it'd be useful maybe for this audience as well, and that is the question of how soon you actually involve the prosecutors. You're talking about the people who actually go and inspect, but at some point the Crown has to get involved. And have you got any comments about this case in that respect?
Yeah, why don't you take that? How are you talking to Paul?
Every file is going to be different. You'll have some variation, but for these larger files, it's always easier to have your Crown on board at the start of the investigation, because you're going to be gathering evidence, information. So the more he's aware of how you actually collected the samples or the evidence and how it's being used in the brief, at the end it's going to save him time too, because he'll just have to keep reviewing as he goes along instead of having to review the whole file. So for a larger file like this, we would recommend towards the end, but maybe a smaller file towards the end, this should be okay.
And on that note, in thanking people, we have a really fantastic relationship with our Crown prosecutors. I mentioned I'm a recovering corporate lawyer. Whenever I spend time with our Crown prosecutors, it makes me think if I had done that kind of law, I might still be a lawyer. I really admire the work that they do. And they have to do a lot of work to educate judges about our laws and regulations, because the judges aren't seeing these things on a regular basis, and so they have to educate them about science and about our inspection powers and why it's important that PERC, which is used in dry cleaning, is handled effectively, and why you might want to put a dry cleaner in jail if they did something very serious seriously wrong. Those are very difficult things to do. And so we are really fortunate to have some absolutely fantastic Crown prosecutors across the country. And they do a lot of training for our officers to help them get better at the work that they do in investigations. So like I said, we're super fortunate to have them work with us.
Linda.
On achieving the conviction, et cetera, and getting the fine in place. My question is more broad about the enforcement capabilities across Canada. 240 enforcement officers isn't a lot. And I was really impressed by the way you could concentrate your efforts in this file. And I think you said you did 300 investigations or 300 inspections out in the Bay of Fundy, and then you laid more, you were able to do more investigations. But I'm just wondering if you could talk about, like, routinely in New Brunswick, how often you can do a random sort of inspection or enforcement that's not triggered by finding dead lobster, because, you know, from the perspective of an environmental group, enforcement doesn't happen often enough, and we know that there aren't enough enforcement officers to do the enforcement, and it's always just a question of who's out there actually looking for things without a triggering event happening.
So why don't you talk about New Brunswick, and then I can go more broad after that.
Well, in New Brunswick, we've got 6 officers. So most of our time is, you could say, reactive. So we would react to a spill or an event. But we also have routine planned inspections where Ottawa would come down with, let's say this year we're going to focus on these sectors, these industries. So we also do proactive inspections as well, which is maybe, I would say, half and half reactive, half just being proactive.
So more broadly, I get asked this question all the time, and yeah, if you'd like to double my budget, I think that'd be fantastic. I don't think there's any program in government that doesn't want more money to do its work, right? I think we do a very good job with what we have. I think you don't want an environmental cop on every corner. It might not be the best use of taxpayers' money, but obviously would like to have more resources. We all would. We work a lot with partners. The mandate is shared federally and provincially in a lot of cases, so we do rely on our provincial partners as well, and we work together with them. As Fernand mentioned, we're trying to get better at the proactive work that we do. Once an incident has happened and we're responding to it, the damage is already done, and we have to wonder too about what we're not seeing and finding. And as I mentioned, had those lobsters not crawled into lobster traps and died, we wouldn't have had any evidence to go on. So there are probably things happening that we don't know about because we're not looking in that area. So we've invested quite heavily in our intelligence capacity and Environment Canada enforcement to help us have some more foresight into where some of the more challenging areas might be, so that we can do some proactive projects and really try and identify what the biggest environmental harms are with the expertise of the rest of the department, and then use our enforcement expertise to tackle those harms. So it's a way to maximize the use of resources. I can tell you that I think we have more enforcement officers than the US EPA criminal division does, which surprised me when I found that out. They put a lot more of their work into the civil side. But I always answer this question by saying, yeah, phone your MP. If you'd like us to have a larger mandate, I will certainly accept that challenge. We'd take it. But I think we're resourced fairly well to do what we do in a quality way right now.
Okay, we've finished exactly on time. This is wonderful. And I'd like to thank, on behalf of everyone here, both Heather and Fernand. It was just fascinating. That is, I think, a really revealing presentation for lawyers, and I wish I got that in law school.
Me too.
So you should be visiting law schools. Anyways, thank you very much. We'll resume at 1:15, and we'll leave people to their own devices for lunch, but my brother can give you some advice in that respect, I think.
For the locals, you already know where you want, if you want to go somewhere to grab a quick, I think this isn't working anymore, a quick bite, but for everybody from outside, there are a few options nearby. The University Club, which is right across the quadrangle here, the building directly opposite, has a little dining room upstairs, but they also have a pub downstairs, and visitors are welcome. And you may mention that you've come to the seminar, but it doesn't really matter. So that's the closest. If you come out the door and go down to the left, the giant secret police headquarters looking building in stone on the left is the Killam Library. And in the interior courtyard, there's a food court with a few different options, sandwiches, soup, and other things. And if you simply go down that same way, but continue on just not even a block further on the right, you'll see a fairly large building, the Student Union building. It's clearly marked. They have a food court area and a little bar where they have food services as well. So, and all of those are within a couple of minutes walk.